So when you say you're a moderate, well, what in the world does that mean? Let's say you have a person who has literally half of their positions are Democratic, or what is perceived as Democratic, and the other half are Republican positions. Presumably that's a moderate, right? Well, what if you take another person who has the exact opposite of all of those positions? Just every one of them is switched. Well, that person is the exact opposite of the first person, but they're both moderates, right?
Welcome back to Drop the Mask. I'm very excited about our guest today. He is an expert poker player. He has a Substack and a podcast, both titled Haman Nature, which give a libertarian take on philosophy, culture, and politics. I highly recommend both. Adam Haman, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, good to be on. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Anything else you'd like to tell people about yourself before we get started?
Well, direct people to my Substack, which is Haman Nature, my last name there, nature at substack.com. And I also have a podcast and YouTube show. If you want to watch the video version, it's youtube.com/@Haman Nature. Search for it that way, because if you just put in Haman Nature in YouTube, you get 5,000 Michael Jackson videos. I'm starting to resent that song.
Yes. Yeah, and another good reason to go check it out. You've just put out a handful of episodes with the great Bob Murphy. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about is that he said libertarians spend too much time on politics. And you agreed. So what do you mean by that?
I mean many things. First of all, people should live their lives first and make that as rewarding as they possibly can. Fulfilling family, good job, pursue their passion, have a well-rounded life. But then also I think libertarians try to fit their entire philosophy into political philosophy, and that's an error. Political philosophy is only a tiny sliver of philosophy. You've got metaphysics and ethics and epistemology and all the rest that you might want to delve into. And what libertarian political philosophy is just what the laws of a society should be. The size and scope of government, or if government should even exist, but it doesn't tell you how to live your life, which is why I think it's such a huge error to be either a quote, left libertarian or a right libertarian. Your own personal views on how to live your life and what good moral behavior is doesn't have anything to do with what the law should be. The law should be focused narrowly on property rights, freedom of association, the things we talk about when we talk about the non-aggression principle and all the messy issues that come up when we try to apply it to, specific context, the messy real world. But most people, when they discover that libertarianism is a thing, they just try to import everything about themselves into it, which is why they get themselves into so many arguments. It's tragic, really.
Yeah, and then they do ridiculous things like starting podcasts.
No, that's our narcissism, my friend. Don't get it confused.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we've established that libertarians do spend too much time on politics, there's a whole other world. Let's talk politics.
Okay, that's what we do.
Yes. So with the election coming up in just a few days, as we're recording this, you just had a good episode on democracy where you're critiquing this video about mathematical reasons why democracy isn't working. And the guy never really got into any math, which was funny. But there are a couple of points in there that I think are worth mentioning so we can establish why democracy isn't what it's cracked up to be. So one of the things you point out is that this guy's biased toward the moderate position. What is wrong with being a moderate?
Great question. Before I answer it, you should definitely link to this dude's video in the show notes because it's hilarious. It's got that clickbaity title, is democracy mathematically impossible or something like that. And then, as you intimated, he just goes through and shows various possible voting methods and why they don't lead to the outcome that he personally values, which is like the moderate should always win or something like that. And yeah, he's got math in the title, but there's hardly any math in there. And then when it finally does show up, it's that kind of theorem based. I'll give you a bunch of assumptions and an outcome will spit out. Arrows and possibility theorem specifically. But yeah, what's so wrong with the moderate position? Well, first of all, it's relatively incoherent. We all sort of know in modern politics that the Democrats have a set of policy positions, and there might be a few deviations among particular people, but for the most part, if I show you a Democrat and ask you what they believe policy wise, you're going to have an accurate understanding of what that is. It's a list. It's a
Mhm.
it's a cohesive list, and the same for on the right. There's a bunch of things that just can seem to consistently go with people that are on the right. The tricky one is war, because apparently both sides like that. But anyway, you've got these two sets of positions, left wing and right wing. So when you say you're a moderate, well, what in the world does that mean? Let's say you have a person who has literally half of their positions are Democratic, or what is perceived as Democratic, and the other half are Republican positions. Presumably that's a moderate, right? Well, what if you take another person who has the exact opposite of all of those positions? Just every one of them is switched. Well, that person is the exact opposite of the first person, but they're both
Mhm.
moderates, right? So what in the world does the term mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it would make some sort of sense if you're talking about one specific issue, like I want zero taxation, and the other person wants 100% taxation. Okay, maybe a moderate wants 50% taxation. But I don't think that's what people mean when they say they're a moderate. I think it means they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Or maybe they think they have a few views from either side, so that makes them moderate. But it really is a descriptor. It doesn't help. I don't know which views. I don't know what you believe.
Yeah, I think it also kind of assumes that there is just a linear spectrum of political understanding, and
Right.
there's only two positions, and Democrats are on one end, Republicans are on the other, and maybe one wants 40% taxes, one wants 35%. And to moderate that is still just a non starter for me. So,
No, you bring up a great point. The political spectrum isn't the left-right linear one that we're all taught. It's more like a diamond or a square, depending on how you draw it,
yeah.
with authoritarianism on one end and pure individualism, libertarianism on the other, and then you'll have left wing and right wing, on the other axes. And yeah, if you wanted to tell me you're a moderate on the libertarian to authoritarian axis, well, that kind of means something. It means you want half of life governed by government edict and the other half in the sphere of personal decisions, private decisions. Okay, that means a little something.
Yeah.
But yeah, the left right and saying you're in the middle of that, I don't know what that means.
Right. And if you wanted to, I think you could break it down into an infinite number of issues, and each one is its
Right.
own dimension, and it could get really complicated. So, all right. um, so I have still seen a lot of people celebrate moderation in politics. Like Elon Musk is an example. I think he's directly said we should be more moderate. Why do you think that's such an attractive thing for otherwise smart people?
Well, most people don't think about these things that deeply, and moderation just sounds right. I mean, if you're presented with two extreme positions, surely the safer one is the moderate one, right? But I don't think that's the situation we're dealing with in politics. It's like, do you want moderation in how much poison we should be ingesting? Some things are just good and some things are evil. I think political force is evil. I don't really want moderation in that. But Elon is a smart guy and he's getting smarter. Like, I think the I think the backlash against Trump has really woken up a whole bunch of people as to what the nature of the state is. And I think Elon, like many people over the last 8 years or so, have just sort of woken up to that fact. I mean, you even had the former head of Twitter, Jack Dorsey. He tweeted the Rothbard book or pamphlet,
Anatomy of the
The
state.
Nature of
Yeah.
the State or something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Can't remember. I can't believe it. Can't remember the name of that. But yeah, and we've got Glenn Greenwald waking up, and Jimmy Dore, and all these Tucker Carlson used to be a huge
Hmm.
warmonger, and I think a lot of people are waking up to these things. And Elon's probably one of them. But if you're on stage in front of an audience of a bunch of people, just saying you want more moderation probably is the smart way to go, I guess, if you're just talking to normies. But
No, that's
even
a
though
good
people
point.
are
It
moving in,
sounds safe, right? It sounds like, okay,
Yeah,
this guy's not
yeah.
crazy. At least we can, we might not get everything we want, but here's a little bit.
Also, just saying you're a moderate doesn't say you're going to be right in the middle on a situation. Like,
True.
I'm sure he's not a moderate for free speech. He's for free speech, but he
Hmm.
probably also wants to, keep things he doesn't want on his platform off. He wants the freedom to control his own property. So is that what he means by moderate? I don't know. That's fine. That puts him like on the 99.9% category as far as the free speech spectrum. So
Right.
that's the thing. Like we were saying earlier, what does moderate mean? It's in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. Yeah. So that guy also made a case for approval voting, which is where you would rate on a scale of, say, I don't know, -10 to +10, how much you approve or disapprove of a candidate, or it could just be a simple approve, disapprove, neutral. It doesn't have to be on a scale, but anyway, they would get points accumulated based on that score. Do you think that would improve anything uh, compared to our current system, or is there something wrong with it?
Well, with only one caveat that democracy itself is trash.
Of
We
course.
can get into that a little later if you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of like approval voting. In the modern world, most people are reflexively doing approval voting, or they're trying to. Like, I don't really believe that a bunch of people loved Hillary or loved Trump in 2016. I think a whole lot of those votes cast were just against the other person. And I think it would be more effective, especially in primaries, if you could signal your positive support or your negative support and even weight it. I think that would be kind of great. And if you combine that with some sort of a, not ranked choice, for example, but like if you had a unit of approval voting and you could put, I don't know, 70% of it negative on Hillary Clinton with 30% of it positive on Trump or something, that would signal what you actually are voting for a lot better, I think.
Yeah, I gotta say, it would be fun to just go right down the ballot and do negative, negative, negative for just about everybody and everything.
Yeah, we do
That,
have on the ballot in Nevada literally none of the above. We have NOTA on our ballots, and it's
oh,
kind of
nice.
fun.
Yeah, we don't have that here. Um,
If you don't mind, can I say a brief word about how horrible democracy is?
yeah, please. I was, yeah, just about to say that. Go ahead.
Um, First of all, democracy is fine if everything uh, is voluntary. If you're just in a book club and you're trying to decide what book to read for the next session, I have no problem with choosing the book based on voting. That's fine. The problem with democracy is we're enslaved into it and then said that we have freedom because we can exercise our vote. Well, to hell with that. You forced me into this.
Hmm.
We never signed the social contract. You can't just you can't just draw an imaginary border on the earth and say everybody in here is under my rule, but we get to vote. So what are you complaining about? So it's not that majority rule or anything like it is in itself evil, unless you didn't volunteer to be a part of that decision-making process.
Hmm.
And most people just sort of, like the dude in the video, they just take the political rule as a given and then quibble about how we're supposed to cast our ballots or something. And that's just missing the point.
Yeah, I think you're right. That seems to be most people's attitude towards democracy is that it's just a given, that this is the best thing ever. Um, and yeah, as we'll see, there's clearly a lot of problems with it. The thing with the book club, as you were saying, if you get voted down and the book you like doesn't get selected, and that's a deal breaker for you, you can leave the book club. You don't have that choice when you're dealing with politics.
Absolutely. And you can make it meaningful too. I mean, it doesn't have to be like if I don't get my way, I just leave and that's penalty free. Like before you even get into the book club situation, you could post up, I don't know, $1,000 or something.
Hmm.
And if I don't follow through and participate in this discussion in good faith, well, I forfeit my $1,000. You can make all these arrangements as detailed and as powerful and as important as you want, as long as you actually volunteered to be a part of it in the first place. That's the critical thing: freedom of association.
You brought up Arrow's impossibility theorem. I don't know how much that's worth talking about, but do you have a good explanation, a quick explanation what that is?
No, I looked into it for the video. It's just a bunch of assumptions about what a good democratic process should yield. I forget what they are.
Hmm.
It doesn't even matter. Some of them I quibbled with, some of them are fine. I just don't particularly care about that kind of math, you know. A model is only as good as its assumptions, and if I don't think that much of your assumptions, like who cares? So,
Yes.
you know, I gave that issue short shrift in the video, and
Mhm.
again, it's just because I don't care. I'm sorry. I have my own problems with democracy, and you didn't need to convince me that these voting methods yield weird results because they just, yeah, of course they do. Democracy is a gross and imperfect thing. That's why it's important to look beyond the system, the voting method, and look at the application of power and whether that's justifiable or not. And in most cases, it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I've tried to look into it. I've read through it. And I just start to glaze over because, yeah, it doesn't matter. I already don't believe in democracy, so it's not adding anything. And then, like you said, the assumptions, like one of them is it's assuming that the agents or the voters, they have complete and well-ordered preferences over all the outcomes under consideration. And we know voters do not have complete and well-ordered preferences. They don't even understand most issues. Neither do I. So voting on its own, it doesn't do it for me. Um, yeah, so I don't need all the transitive properties and the mathematical proofs when you just understand people as individuals, and individuals have different needs, and having one candidate represent a collection of those needs of any size group of people, those needs will not end up being met. So it just seems logical to me, but that's what I'm doing here, trying to convince people.
Amen, brother. You and me both.
Hey guys, let me take a second to tell you about some new bonus content over on my Locals channel. If you like this conversation about voting, I did a whole mini episode about it that can be exclusively found there. I take on the arguments from this famous George Carlin rant.
I don't vote. Two reasons. Two reasons I don't vote. First of all, it's meaningless. And secondly, I don't vote because I believe if you vote, you have no right to complain.
And I give my thoughts about whether anarchists can or should be voting. If you've been agonizing about the decision with the election just 2 days away, you can get permission from me and other great people like Lysander Spooner. Check it out at dropthemaskpod.locals.com. Now back to the show. Yeah. So, okay, let's move on from that. Let's get into this cycle of elections. What do you think about some of the big name libertarians like Dave Smith, Clint Russell, even Joshua Smith coming out and saying they're going to vote for Donald Trump?
Well, I certainly don't blame them in the sense that it looks like all the elements of the deep state and the regime that rules over us and has for over 100 years, it looks like they're all lining up behind Kamala Harris as they did Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and Obama and George Bush. So I don't, I mean, Trump's virtue is that for all his faults, and he has many faults, he's clearly not part of that regime, which is why they hate him. Even though he can be fooled into doing their bidding, he's not in on it. And so I certainly understand why a libertarian might want to vote for him. I am in leadership in the Libertarian Party of Nevada and on the Libertarian National Council, so I'm not going to support any candidate that's not our own. But somebody asked me recently, who I'm voting for, and I said I'm pretty much going to go into the ballot booth and vote a straight none ya ticket, as in none of your goddamn business. So yeah, I get why all these prominent libertarians are doing that, and I don't have any particular comments except to say I get it. I don't know what a Trump presidency is going to yield. I hope he wasn't just telling us what we wanted to hear when he said he'd free Ross Ulbricht on his first day. I think inviting him to our convention in D.C. and having Vivek Ramaswamy show up and RFK Jr., I think that's really great. We are being recognized as an important voice and an important voting bloc, and people want to come and seek our attention and support. But in that process, we get to talk to them. We get to rub off on them. And since our ideas are correct, isn't that good? We can influence them. When people hear what we have to say, the light bulbs start going off. I'm really frustrated with the kind of libertarian that just thinks we should sit in a basement like mushrooms and only talk to each other and never see the light of day just because of some instinct towards purity. I'm not afraid of losing my purity. I know what I think and what I believe. There's no amount of talking Kamala Harris can do to me to make me change my opinion. I've read everything that Bill Kristol has to say about foreign policy. I'm not convinced, but we can convince them. That is how it works. Every single time I have deep conversations with people about politics who are formerly on the left or the right, I make inroads. And I just think we need a whole lot more of it. And I hope that bears fruition if Trump manages to win without getting cheated or assassinated or whatever nonsense the deep state has in store for him.
Yeah, I wonder what you think about Angela McArdle, the LNC chair. She's been very open about supporting Trump, basically saying, yeah, we have our candidate, go vote for him in a blue state. Is there any line where you think, do you think that crosses anything that they shouldn't do?
Yeah, she's certainly taking a wink and a nod to its extreme, if not beyond.
Right.
I think a lot of Angela. I respect the hell out of what she's managed to accomplish as chair of this party. As with anybody's actions out there in the real world, I can probably find things that I would do differently. Maybe I wouldn't have worn the clown nose or whatever. But on the other hand, I mean, our presidential candidate and vice presidential candidate have made a whole lot of enemies, and that doesn't have anything to do with Angela McArdle. That's not her fault. In 2022, Chase Oliver told the whole party that half of you he doesn't care for much at all. And Angela and her leadership doesn't represent him. He went to Twitter and specifically to say that he does not support Ron Paul. I forget his exact wording, but he loves this culture war stuff. He's clearly a left libertarian. And again, I don't think we should be thick like that. I think we need to be thin. Your cultural preferences don't have anything to do with the law should be. So why are you acting like they do? And yeah, I mean, maybe Angela could have behaved differently, but we have a terrible candidate. He's not fundraising well at all. I think his campaign strategy is terrible. He just has a chip on his shoulder all the time. I don't think he's going to do well. And that ain't Angela's fault. That's his fault.
Yeah, I've barely heard a word out of the guy since the convention, so it's very, very bizarre.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I've seen some libertarians not happy about, the Trump support stuff. So there's people comparing this to like, oh, this is just the same as Obama versus Romney. They're basically the same guy. They're going to lie to you. They're going to trick you. Or Bush versus Gore. And looking back, no, I don't think there was much differentiating those candidates. Is it different this time?
Yeah, I think so. And it has to do with that deep state versus just not divide. When it was Bush versus Kerry or Obama versus McCain or Obama versus Romney, I agree. If you're going to vote, and I think you should, I think what you needed to do in those years was go in and vote for the Libertarian candidate, whether you liked them or not. In particular, they were good enough, and you're signaling, hopefully, if enough votes went for the Libertarian Party, they'd go to lp.org and look at the platform and see what this party is. And you're signaling that you're not just apathetic, you're not just sitting on your couch because I'm not interested in politics. You're sending a distinct, clear signal that I do not want either McCain or Obama. I view them as both equally warmongering and in service to the entrenched interests that suckle off our teat, and we can't do a thing about it. I actually want the size and scope of government to recede. I want the size and scope of our private lives to increase. I want more autonomy. I want less government control, less regulations. And while Trump is a huge mixed bag on all of those things, because he's just a guy, he's just a real estate developer from New York, he clearly is not part of the Obama, Romney, Bush, Clinton, regime. Now, Biden, now Harris. He's not part of that, and I think there are good reasons why a libertarian might think that's advantageous to support that cause.
Yeah, you mentioned Ross Ulbricht. You got your free Ross sign in the background there.
Amen.
I really do want to see that, and that alone might be worth a vote for Trump if it really happens. But outside of him and his family, it won't really change anything on the bigger scale. It would be great for them. I don't want to take that away from them. But it won't stop the regime from doing something like that again. So I think maybe
push back a little bit on that.
Okay, go ahead.
on the narrow analysis, yeah, it's just happy for him and happy for the family.
Yeah.
But even having Donald Trump on our stage in D.C. at our convention say he was going to free him caused a huge spike in search results for who this guy is. What is the Silk Road? What the hell's going on here? The attention is more important than just the one guy, as much as I want the one guy freed, because it's a travesty of justice. And if he frees him on day one, it's going to be a huge spike. What was the whole case about? He really got 2 life sentences back to back plus 40 years as insult to injury for starting a website as a first-time offender? Is that really what happened? Is it really over Bitcoin? Did they really lie and say he hired a hitman or some nonsense just to poison the jury pool? I think having attention, a spotlight shown on that horrible injustice does us good, all of us, just by waking people up, dropping the mask, so to speak,
Yeah.
showing people what in the world is going on. Schoolhouse Rock lied to you. The government has controlled public schooling in this country to brainwash us for over 100 years. And it's good to have very high-profile instances of what that looks like, just to wake people up.
Very good point. Yes. I'll take that. I agree. I think, yes. And an even bigger argument for Trump is mostly around, I think, what he won't do. For example, I think the biggest reason government can be so big and awful is that it has the power to print money from thin air. And something like Bitcoin could probably fix that or help. And Democrats have been just salivating, trying to get this, shut down, regulated, to the point of just trying to kill it. So I don't know if Kamala has said anything herself about it, but I know others have, and she'll just go along with what she's told. Trump, on the other hand, seems to be embracing it, and I do not think he would put more restrictions on it. He would probably elevate it. And that gives it at least 4 more years to grow and be more embedded and develop into everyday life, which I think the bigger it gets, the harder it is to stop. So, yeah, that's one thing. What do you think about that?
I think you're exactly right. And above and beyond Trump going to that Bitcoin conference and saying that he'd support it, you had RFK Jr. there at the same time doing the same thing. And I think the other people around Trump are also pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin. I think Tulsi Gabbard is. I know Vivek Ramaswamy is. I'm pretty sure J.D. Vance is.
I think so.
And so Trump's instincts are kind of all over the place. He had to have, Vivek sit him down and tell him what a central bank digital currency even was and why it was so bad. But once he did hear, he was all on board. So it's more than just the Trump thing that you're getting. He is starting to surround himself with people that I think we should be glad he's surrounded by. It's a lot better than his first administration, assuming he wins this time.
Yeah, agreed.
On the other hand, I'm sorry, dude. On the other hand,
go ahead.
As far as printing money goes, yeah, he's happy to print all kinds of money. And if he wants a quote-unquote rising stock market and good economy, he's going to put pressure on the Fed to lower interest rates, just like any of these other doofuses. So it's not like the guy's perfect. He's an egomaniac and he's self-centered. I'm just encouraged that he's not them. He's got all sorts of other problems. I'm not thrilled with his use of the tariff, but yeah, he's not them.
Yeah, on the tariff thing, he said that he wants to end the income tax. I very much doubt he would be able to accomplish that, but let's say he did and implemented this tariff thing. Do you think that's a step in the right direction?
Yeah, for sure. One of the worst things the government does to us is the IRS. It makes us testify against ourselves. It violates the Fifth Amendment. It perverts it makes productivity a crime, and the penalty for it is this tax. I mean, it's just a gross perversion. If I could swap out the income tax and everything associated with it with a completely flat, 3 or 4% tariff or something, and then shrank the government small enough where that would finance everything, I'd gladly take that. But I know what's going to happen. What's going to happen is we're going to end up with both, because that's what always happens. We're not going to get rid of the IRS, and he's going to start implementing tariffs and doing so in a way. I mean, he thinks he's doing international combat and using these tariffs to, quote, strike good trade deals, unquote. And I don't want managed trade. I don't believe the government knows what the trade situation should be. So, yeah, I'm going to be unhappy with darn near everything he does regarding tariffs. But for less war and all the other, I do think he's good at regulations too, especially with smart people around him like RFK Jr. and Vivek. So maybe we can get some relief in the regulation sphere. I mean, all across the area. Oh, and energy. My goodness, we need the restrictions taken off of energy before we lose Western civilization. We need fossil fuels to be re-embraced, and we need to turn towards nuclear and quit subsidizing these wind energy boondoggles and these solar boondoggles. Solar will eventually be a thing, but I'm thinking hundreds of years from now, when battery tech has gotten better and energy transmission tech has gotten better. For now, we need gas and oil, and we need to turn towards nuclear.
Agreed. So going back to the voting thing, you kind of argued with Bob a little bit, just saying there could be some marginal benefit to voting in general. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, specifically, he was saying marginal analysis reveals that each person's vote is, worse than negligible. He would argue it's functionally meaningless, especially when you take it into consideration that you just live in one state. So even if you swing those electoral college votes, you still have to rely on, all the other states. And I get his point. I was just arguing that, the big argument I made is that we libertarian individualists who focus on rights and marginal analysis for that reason, the error we're prone to make is having a poor intuition about how collective action happens. And voting is like that. I gave the examples of, say 10 crazed MS-13 gang members were descending on your neighborhood. And there were 15 guys who could repel them. And if you're one of those guys, you're like, the other 14 could probably handle it. It doesn't really matter if I participate or not. Well, that intuition doesn't scale. And also, I gave the example of barn raising, like you've seen in the movies and like the Amish do. If there's 50 or 60 of you that show up to raise that barn, yeah, it's true. On the margin, if you participate or not, it doesn't matter. The barn will get raised. But if everybody thinks that, then the barn doesn't get raised. Right. Our individualist intuitions do not scale towards making collective action happen. And while I get that point, Bob's point, I think he was wrong about that until he played 4D chess with me and said, yeah, but I'm not just sitting there, going to sleep instead of raising the barn. I said, I'm voting in Jesus of Nazareth. I'm not staying home. I'm actually voting. So what I'm really doing in your barn raising analysis is I'm drawing in the dirt some description of a better way to raise that barn that would take half the resources and a third of the manpower. If you guys would only listen to me. And there's a point to be made. If 300 million of us, or whoever's allowed to vote, all voted in Jesus of Nazareth, that would have an amazing effect on the political landscape, the moral, cultural landscape too. So I think I was right and he wasn't, but that was a hell of a move to play rhetorically. Well played, Dr. Murphy. Well played.
Well played. Yes, it was good. Can you explain a little bit more about how collective action does happen then? Because you said libertarians aren't very good at it. How does it happen? How do we get together and accomplish these things? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Ideally, it happens on a voluntary basis. We have a unified set of circumstances and goals, and we just come together and make a deal and then follow through. And as, autistic and egocentrical as libertarians can be, we do manage to accomplish it from time to time. What makes the voting situation more problematic is it isn't voluntary exactly. It's not us all getting together and starting the book club and voting or whatever, or us deciding that we want to help one another as neighbors and raise that barn together. It's how to act within the coercive apparatus of the state where we're imprisoned in. And unless we want to go start a floating city or something, or do whatever John McAfee tried to do as he was being harassed off the coast of Thailand or whatever that was, we can't really escape this. Even if we flee this nation state with its monopolistic jurisdiction, the whole earth is covered with nothing but nation states. We're trapped. And so how do you coordinate action to try and fight against that? It's a little more dicey than the examples I was citing. So I get Bob's point. But to answer your question, we just talk and realize we have shared values and shared goals, and then we strike a deal and execute, follow through.
But how is this possible without a government?
Who would build the roads?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so with the barn example, I get. You say it doesn't scale. So what do you mean by that? What are you scaling here? Just the number
Well,
of
you're just
people, the
getting
number of
from the-
barns?
Yeah, it's just the truth that if everybody thought the way you did, no, the action doesn't occur. You saying that it doesn't matter if I participate or not, it still will happen. Yeah, but if everybody thinks that, it doesn't. And it's a little bit the same with like economic marginal analysis too. I mean, if we're talking about what the marginal value product for an employee is, you take that, you calculate that by looking at the whole firm with all its employees, and then you figure out, what the marginal employees is worth. But he's not worth that all by himself, right? The company just can't operate with only that one employee. It all has to work together. So marginal analysis is a very useful prism through which to look at things, but it's not the only framework you have to evaluate what's going on in the world and human nature and all the things we do. Sometimes you have to look at the entire company or the entire voting block in this case. And if we all decide that our vote doesn't matter, well, then our vote it doesn't matter. But if we all decide that it does, it does. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, like he said, on the margins, your one vote is probably almost never going to sway anything. But yeah, if everyone thinks the same and no libertarians vote, then that whole voting block is completely wiped out. And again, we don't believe in democracy. It's a bad system, but given that we have it, allegedly, each one of these 150 million votes, however many will be cast, are individuals, right? So it does add up. Allegedly.
Yeah, and I don't want the listeners to think that I think definitely, therefore, you need to vote for a Republican or a Democrat. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying if you think this is a meaningless distinction because both candidates are statist, if you view it as Obama versus McCain, for example, then still, if you show up and vote Libertarian, that's one vote saying you want something that's not these. You are a member of the voting public and you are not being represented. And then if two people show up and do that, that's that much more important. And if 10 million of us got together and voted that way, oh my Lord, it would be the biggest shift in American politics ever, or at least in the modern period. So yeah, your vote matters. It really, really does, even though marginal analysis says it doesn't. The intuition doesn't scale.
Got it. Yep. I think another part of the reason why democracy doesn't work is that people are not well informed. They're very misinformed most of the time. You wrote a Substack about bias in the news. So people on the right complain about the left-wing bias in the media. People on the left complain about the right-wing bias in media outlets like Fox. And you say they're both right. How is that possible?
Yeah, they're both right. It's hard to understand what's going on in the world because all we have are the narratives presented to us by other people. And how do you tell when they're telling the truth or not? Because they have their own selfish interests, and it's not like, I don't think there ever was in the history of man an objective journalist. They're not telling you everything that happened. They're picking and choosing what facts are important, and that in itself is an editorial choice. And especially just as politically bifurcated as we've been, we have to understand that you're not getting the truth. You're getting one person's story filtered through the prism of an editorial board. It was a little easier back in yellow journalism days when we sort of knew the character of the dude that owned the newspaper, and what he was printing every day was, just basically his opinion, or as much control as he could exert over his writers and reporters. Somewhere along the way, we stopped understanding that it was all narrative. Like we believed the Walter Cronkite myth, that it was just pure truth being fed to you by this unbiased person, but that's just never been the case. So since you can't go to Ukraine and understand what's happening, since you can't go to Gaza and understand what's happening, you have to rely on these reports. What are you supposed to do? I say you have to understand the biases embedded in the various news sources you're listening to and try to listen to as many different perspectives and biases as you can, and then sort of try and triangulate towards the truth. And it's a work in progress. You're never going to get there. Treat every story you see with as much skepticism as it deserves, which is a lot. When they tell you about a hurricane or a earthquake, that's probably believable. There's no political interest there. But when they tell you like why unemployment is down this quarter, first of all, you should question those numbers because the government has a bias. And then second of all, you should question whether they understand economics to tell you why unemployment is low that quarter. It's hard work to be an informed person in a world as complicated as we're in. Like, we evolved to live in these tiny little villages, right? These tiny groups, and you basically could see everything that was important. Or somebody you really trusted told you that there was a saber-toothed tiger 2 valleys over or whatever. Probably not a saber-tooth, but yeah, and things are more complicated now. So you just have to be a big boy and not just believe everything that the talking head guy on the TV is telling you, because he's just telling you his story.
Yeah, that's another reason why democracy is not very good, because if people are allowed to make their own individual decisions, you don't care about what's happening in Ukraine, for example. You're not going to send your money over to fight a war over there forever because you don't care. You're worried about feeding yourself, having a house to live in. That's probably at the very bottom of your concern. If you live in the United States and something else is happening on the other side of the world, as people are fighting, who cares? But this is supposed to be something that's the biggest issue of all time, at least according to people in our government.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of times we joke about, I mean, even people on the left will try and say, oh, people should have to take an IQ test to vote, or at least answer some basic questions about what's going on before they're allowed to impact. And I certainly get that. The framers of the Constitution, the smartest thing they did was to make the government's power super, super, super small. So, voting didn't matter that much. But then it was also kind of smart that they, as sexist and classist of it as they were, restricting the vote to land-owning males or something like that. I don't support that system, but I do support restricting voting to the people that it impacts most directly, right? Like, people who don't make any money at all really shouldn't be able to vote on how much wealthy people are taxed. That's kind of weird, right? There's a moral problem there.
Right.
But the problem with any effort to try and fix this, quote unquote, is that it's the government that ends up deciding what the standard should be. So if you make it an IQ test, it's going to be the government that decides what goes on that test. If you make it a quiz about what's going on in the world, it's going to be gamed because it's going to be the government that runs that filtration process. So as dangerous as government is, and as corrupted as these people are, you can't let them decide who qualifies and who doesn't qualify to be a voter. You've got to make that something super basic, like a citizen or an age requirement. And it's, again, why it was so important back then to keep government small. Because when it gets as big as it is now, when it gets as big as it was 20 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it's too big for democracy to work. It's way past that point now. Yeah, it's a horrible system.
Yeah, I think your barn analogy comes back into play a little bit here. It's like, if you have a town with 15 people, you need to raise a barn, only 10 people participate. You know who those people are that are not participating and not helping. And there's some social pressure, at least, that would motivate them to actually contribute.
That's a great point. When we're in political units, even if it's not politics, it's just, the dynamics of the village. Yeah, there's ostracization that can occur. There's shame that could be employed because we're dealing in a group dynamic that's appropriate to how we operate. But if it's, you're in Alabama and it's a bunch of lefties in California that are voting on how, all the horrible changes in your life, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't shame those people.
Yeah.
Even if you thought that the size and scope of government was appropriate. A polity of 330 million people or more now, that's just way too big. I like the way the Swiss do it with the federal system, their cantons. They do a pretty good job of trying to minimize the effect of democracy or trying to keep it in something like a proportional
I've heard
boundaries.
people mention this, but I don't know much about it.
It's similar to the way our system is supposed to work.
Okay.
A weak central government and more power delegated to the various cantons, their version of states or regions or something. And I've never been there. I'm sort of talking out of my butt, but I know they respect their version of federalism way more than we do. We abandoned that a long time ago, and we really need to claw it back, either with nullification or secession movements or something. We need to find some way to limit the power that comes from Washington, D.C. Because it's too big over too many people.
Yeah, another thing I got triggered on that you mentioned is that restricting people that can vote. In that video you critiqued, and just a general feeling for a lot of people is that the more people that vote, the better we are. Why is that wrong? Or is it?
No, it's wrong. It's just the fact that most people, like, it would be a travesty if the left got their way and made voting mandatory, as it is in some countries. Our system is benefited by the fact that a whole lot of Americans know that they don't know what's going on, and so they don't vote. I've talked to a few of them, talked to them about politics, and they'll tell me they don't care, they don't want to care, they don't want to know, so they don't vote. It would be worse if they were forced to vote. That would, at best, add noise into the system, but at worst, they would just vote based on whatever they saw on TikTok that morning or whatever, whatever it is that moved them. That's not better. That's not
Right.
Democracy is already bad enough. Just adding uninformed voters does not help make that system better.
Yeah, true. And back to that information thing, the media as it exists, you also wrote that even though they don't really tell the truth, they can still be useful. How is that?
Yeah, I was talking with a buddy of mine when I got that idea. One of the phrases I say way too often is that the map is not the territory. The map being whatever, what CNN is telling you about what's going on in Ukraine, and the territory being reality, what actually is going on in territory. And I was just pointing out that so many of our maps, probably all of them, are just wrong. My buddy says, well, maybe we should just burn those maps. But I'm like, no, they're still useful as long as you understand the biases of the map maker. If you understand that, then again, you can sort of triangulate your way towards something like truth, or at least something that's more useful than nothing. It's that basic question of economics, compared to what? Is an inaccurate map better or worse than absolutely no map at all? And I say it's better if you understand something about the intentions and character of the map maker. I think it'll help you navigate in the world better than an absolute blank piece of paper. As long as you don't think it's reality. That's when it gets truly dangerous, when you think the map is the territory. That's the danger. Don't think that Rachel Maddow is telling you the truth. Or Sean Hannity,
Yes.
It's not real, folks. What they're saying is not true.
Yeah, I love that, man. I think you wrote that a few months ago, and I thought about it probably at least once a week since then. Great analogy. I think that's an awesome place to wrap up. I want us to end it with that point. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody go check out Adam, hamannature.substack.com. Is that right?
That's correct. And also on YouTube, youtube.com/@HamanNature.
And that's HAMAN for people listening. I'll put it up on the screen, but yeah. Thanks again, Adam. I would love to do this again. Very much appreciate your insight.
This was great. I appreciate you having me on.
And thanks everybody for watching. See you next time.